They say parents must give endlessly to their children, but I learned that endless giving without limits can destroy you. I'm Eleanor Hayes, born in 1962 in Melbourne, Australia. Back in my mid-20s, I poured every coin, every dream, into my only son, Adrian. I felt proud as a mother, but then something happened that broke me in ways I never thought possible. Today, at 63, sitting by the quiet glow of my lamp, I'm finally sharing this because silence kept me in chains for too long. If you're listening, drop your country below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your own thoughts. It may just save another life. I remember the first time Adrian asked me for money as a teenager. His shoes were worn out, and I worked 2 jobs, then teaching at a local primary school during the day and cleaning offices at night. When he looked at me with those pleading blue eyes, I told myself no sacrifice was too much. That small purchase grew into larger ones: his college tuition, his failed business ventures, even the car he insisted would make him more respected. Each time I justified it. "He's my son," I whispered at night while balancing overdue bills on the kitchen counter. Love blinded me to the slow erosion of my own life. Adrian grew into a man who believed the world owed him comfort. I never corrected that belief. Instead, I fed it. When he married Isabel, a sharp-tongued woman with a taste for luxury, I became their invisible wallet. Their wedding in Sydney was lavish, yet none of their guests knew the truth that my savings bought: the wine, the flowers, the very roof over their heads. I told myself it was worth it for Adrian's happiness, even as my own body tired from double shifts and the loneliness of a home where even the kettle seemed weary of boiling water for one. The years blurred into decades, they told their friends. They were struggling entrepreneurs building something from the ground up. In reality, I was the ground, the foundation they stepped on. Whenever a bill arrived at their doorstep, my phone rang within the hour. Sometimes Adrian softened his voice, calling me Mom, my dearest. Other times he barked orders, as though I were his employee. And like a loyal worker, I obeyed. It wasn't gratitude he gave back, but expectation. I kept swallowing that bitter truth, convincing myself that my purpose in life was to keep him afloat. But my body began to break under the weight of this devotion. By the time I reached my late 50s, my hands shook from years of work, and my chest carried a constant tightness. The doctor warned me about stress and high blood pressure, but I brushed it aside, choosing to focus on Adrian's next request: a deposit for another business idea. I thought if this one succeeded, maybe he'd finally see me not as a bank, but as a mother worthy of love. The lie I told myself became heavier than any physical burden. The breaking point came one hot summer evening. I had just finished carrying groceries up the steep steps of my small flat in Brunswick. The pain struck like lightning through my chest, stealing my breath. I collapsed on the cold tiles of my kitchen floor, the bag of apples rolling away as my vision blurred. My neighbor, Margaret, found me unconscious minutes later and called an ambulance. At the hospital, machines beeped urgently around me, voices blurred, and I felt myself drifting toward silence. It was in that fragile moment between life and death that I expected Adrian's love to appear, even in the form of worrying. The doctor, a kind man named Dr. Whitmore, dialed Adrian's number from my phone. I couldn't speak. I was too weak, but I listened. His voice was steady when he explained, "Your mother has been rushed here with a serious cardiac episode. We need you to come immediately." I will never forget Adrian's reply. Calm, almost casual, he said, "I can't right now. Isabel and I have dinner reservations at Crown Towers. Tell her I'll check in later." The words sliced through me sharper than any scalpel could. Even as my heart struggled, I felt it shatter in another way. I lay there, unable to scream, unable to plead. The doctor looked at me, his eyes soft with pity, and pressed the phone tighter against his ear as if trying to force Adrian to change his mind. But Adrian didn't. He ended the call with a sigh of annoyance, as though I were an inconvenience rather than the woman who had given him everything. Tears rolled down my cheeks, mingling with the oxygen mask that kept me alive. I had always imagined that if I ever faced death, my son would be there, holding my hand. Instead, he chose steak and champagne. Recovery was slow and lonely. No flowers arrived from Adrian, no visits, not even a text. Margaret visited, bringing homemade soup and warm smiles, but it wasn't the same. Nights were the worst, lying in the hospital bed, listening to the faint laughter of families outside my room. I wondered how love could sour into such indifference. I questioned every choice I'd made. Had I raised him to be selfish, or had I allowed it by never saying no? Guilt gnawed at me harder than the illness. Yet beneath the pain, something new began to stir, quiet anger, one that grew stronger each time I replayed his dismissive voice in my head. When I was finally discharged, the nurses wheeled me to the exit. Margaret met me outside with her little car, and as we drove home, she said, "Eleanor, you can't keep living for him. He's bleeding you dry." I looked out the window at the bustling Melbourne streets, the trams clattering past, and I whispered, maybe it's time I stop. The thought scared me. Cutting Adrian off felt like cutting away a piece of my soul, but another part of me was tired, wounded, yet awakening knew it was the only way to survive. At home, the silence wrapped around me like a blanket. I sat in my living room, staring at the framed photo of Adrian and Isabel smiling at their wedding, a picture I once treasured. Now it mocked me. Their joy was built on my sacrifice, and in that moment, I understood a truth I had long denied. Love without boundaries is not love, it is slavery. My heart, though fragile, pulsed with a new determination. I would no longer be their foundation. I would no longer be their wallet. For the first time in decades, I resolved to stand on my own ground, even if it meant standing alone. That night, as the city lights flickered outside my window, I wrote in my journal, "This is the day I stopped being invisible." My hands trembled, but not from weakness, this time from resolve. I didn't know yet how deep Adrian's betrayal ran, but I felt a storm gathering inside me. My awakening had begun. The first weeks after my discharge from the hospital were quiet, almost deceptively. So, my heart ached, but my mind stayed restless. I could not shake Adrian's words, that cruel dismissal during my darkest moment. Every time I boiled water for tea, the memory came back like steam fogging the window. His voice choosing dinner over me, that pain transformed into suspicion. If he could discard me so easily, what else had he been hiding? For years I believed his stories of financial struggles, of near-bankrupt ventures. But lying in that hospital bed, hearing nothing from him, I began to doubt everything. One evening, Margaret sat across from me at the kitchen table. She had become my anchor, her presence steady and warm. "Eleanor," she said firmly, "you don't look into what's really going on with Adrian. You'll never heal. You gave him your entire life. At least find out what he's done with it." Her words struck a chord. For decades, I had accepted Adrian's stories without question, blind with maternal trust. But trust without verification is a dangerous gamble. I nodded, my fingers tracing the rim of my teacup. That night, I decided to hire someone who could uncover the truth I feared. I reached out to a private investigator named Daniel Rhodes, a retired police officer who worked from a small office in Carlton. His handshake was firm, his eyes sharp with experience. "You're not the first mother to walk in here with this kind of problem," he said gently after I explained my situation. I handed him a folder filled with bank statements, loan documents, and receipts Adrian had pressured me to sign over the years. He flipped through them, his brow tightening. "There are patterns here of large withdrawals, fabricated invoices. I'll need time to dig deeper, but I suspect more than simple carelessness." The waiting gnawed at me. Each day Daniel worked. I tried to keep myself busy reading novels, tending my small garden, walking slowly through the neighborhood to rebuild my strength. But every evening my thoughts returned to Adrian. I wanted to believe he was merely careless, not malicious. Yet deep down, I knew. When the truth finally arrived, it left me shaking. Daniel returned 3 weeks later with a thick folder. "Eleanor," he began carefully, "I need you to sit down." My legs nearly gave way as I lowered myself onto the couch. He laid out photos, financial records, and screenshots. Adrian and Isabel had been living extravagantly, dinners at 5-star restaurants, designer clothes, luxury cars, all charged against accounts tied to my name. They had forged my signature on several loan applications, using me as guarantor without my knowledge. My heart pounded as I saw invoices Adrian had fabricated, pretending to need money for business emergencies that never existed. But the deepest cut came from the photos Daniel slid across the table. Adrian with another woman, not Isabel. Her name was Claudia, a 20-something he had been seeing for almost 2 years. Trips to Bali, weekends at seaside resorts, all financed with my money. My chest burned with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. It wasn't just the betrayal of finances, it was the betrayal of family, of loyalty, of every ounce of love I had. Why would he do this? I whispered, my voice trembling. Daniel's gaze softened. Because he could. Because you allowed him to believe there'd never be consequences. His words stung, but they were true. For 30 years, I had been an endless resource, never questioning, never pushing back. Adrian had not become selfish overnight. I had raised him in a world where my love meant no boundaries. That night, I barely slept. I paced the floor, staring out at the Melbourne skyline, asking myself how long I had been blind. The laughter at his wedding, the excuses about failed ventures, the crocodile tears when he claimed he was struggling. It all looked different now. They hadn't been struggling. They had been feasting on my sacrifice. I pressed my palms against the window glass, whispering into the night, no more. When I confronted Adrian days later, I chose my words carefully. I invited him and Isabel to my flat under the pretense of discussing future financial arrangements. Isabel arrived dressed in a glittering gown, as though she were heading to a gala, while Adrian walked in with that same confident stride I had once admired. They sat on my worn sofa, oblivious to the storm I was about to unleash. I laid Daniel's folder on the table. "Open it," I said quietly. Adrian frowned but complied. His face paled as he flipped through the documents. Isabel gasped when the photographs of Claudia surfaced. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice shrill. Adrian stammered, his hands shaking. "Mom, you don't understand. This is taken out of context." Context. My voice rose, steady yet sharp. "The context is 30 years of me carrying you, Adrian. The context is me nearly dying in a hospital while you were drinking champagne. The context is betrayal." Isabel turned on him like a hawk. "You told me your mother gave you this money willingly. You said she wanted to help us." Adrian stuttered again, but his words collapsed under the weight of the evidence. The room filled with a silence heavier than lead. For once, Adrian had no script, no excuse. I looked at them both, my hands trembling but my resolve firm. It ends here. No more money. No more lies. No more pretending you're victims while I'm bled dry. Adrian reached for my hand, desperation flickering in his eyes. "Mom, please, you can't just cut us off. I need you." I pulled my hand back, tears burning but my voice unshaken. "You needed me when I was on the hospital bed, Adrian. And you chose dinner. I survived without you that night. I'll survive without you now." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of consequences. The bank repossessed Adrian's luxury car when he defaulted on payments I no longer covered. Isabel's friends distanced themselves as whispers of Adrian's affair spread through social circles. Clients abandoned his failing business when forged documents surfaced, revealed through anonymous tips Daniel helped distribute. I watched from a distance, my heart heavy but resolute. Justice had a way of unfolding quietly, without me lifting a finger beyond saying no. Yet the fallout wasn't just external, it was internal too. For the first time in decades, I felt a strange calm. like breathing freely after years underwater. Cutting Adrian off wasn't just about money. It was reclaiming my identity. I wasn't just a mother. I was Eleanor Hayes, a woman who had given enough and who finally understood that love cannot thrive where respect does not exist. I began writing in my journal daily, documenting everything: the sacrifices, the betrayals, the revelations. Margaret suggested I turn it into a memoir. "You've got a story people need to hear," she said, and perhaps she was right. Sharing my pain could become my healing, and maybe, just maybe, it could help someone else escape the chains of blind sacrifice. But even as I began to rebuild, I knew this wasn't the end. Adrian had fallen, yes, but he wasn't finished. He would come back, begging, pleading, perhaps even trying to manipulate me again. I needed to be ready not just with anger, but with strength that could not be shaken. And so, as I closed my journal one night and looked out at the city lights, I whispered to myself, "The next chapter belongs to me. My revenge would not be in shouting, nor in lawsuits or endless fights. My revenge would be in my renewal, in a life lived fully, joyfully, without chains." After the confrontation, my flat felt different, lighter, though emptier too. For 30 years, Adrian's shadow had loomed over every corner of my life. Now, though silence filled my rooms, I felt the strange stirrings of freedom. For the first time in decades, I woke up not to my son's demands, but to my own breath, my own heartbeat. Still, a voice in the back of my mind whispered, "He will come back." And I was right. It happened sooner than I expected. 2 weeks after the evidence had shattered his perfect facade, Adrian turned up at my door. His hair was disheveled, his eyes red, as though sleepless nights had carved themselves into his face. He knocked softly, not with the booming entitlement he once carried. When I opened the door, he whispered, "Mom, please, I need to talk." I hesitated, my body stiff with caution, but I stepped aside. He entered the flat and looked around, as though seeing it for the first time. Perhaps it was the first time. It had always been just a pit stop on his way to getting what he wanted. He sat on the couch, his hands clasped tightly. "I know I've hurt you," he began, his voice cracking. "I lost everything Isabel left me. The car's gone. The business collapsed. I have nothing now." I studied his face, searching for sincerity. Was this genuine remorse, or just another tactic to regain access to me, to my resources? My heart wanted to believe him, but my mind remembered every hospital silence, every forged document, every time he had chosen comfort over care. I spoke softly, but firmly. "Adrian, do you remember what you told the doctor the night I nearly died?" His head lowered. "Yes, you chose dinner over me." That was the moment I realized I had been nothing more than a wallet to you. Why should I believe this is different? He lifted his head, eyes brimming with tears. "Because I've lost it all. I see now what I've done, what I've destroyed. Please, give me another chance." I didn't answer immediately. Silence stretched between us, punctuated only by the faint ticking of the clock on my wall. In that silence, I realized something profound. I didn't need his apology to heal. His remorse, real or not, couldn't restore the decades I had lost. My healing had already begun the moment I set boundaries. Still, I looked at him and said, "I'll never stop being your mother, Adrian." But being your mother doesn't mean being your victim. If you want to rebuild anything with me, it has to be through respect, not dependency. He nodded, but I knew words were easy. Change would take more than promises. It would take action. The months that followed became my true renaissance. I focused on myself in ways I hadn't in decades. I joined a writing circle in Fitzroy where retirees shared poetry and memoir drafts. Nervously, I read excerpts from my journal, and to my surprise, the group listened with tears in their eyes. One woman touched my arm afterward and whispered, "Your story could save someone like me." That moment lit a fire in me. I committed to turning my journals into a book not for profit, but for liberation. As I wrote, I relived each sacrifice, each betrayal, but I also rewrote them with clarity. On paper, I wasn't just the mother who was exploited. I was the woman who survived, who refused to remain invisible. Slowly, word of my writing spread. A local community center invited me to speak, and I stood in front of women my age, mothers, grandmothers, daughters, telling them about boundaries, about love that must never cost one's self-respect. Their nods, their tears, their applause filled me with a purpose I had never known. For the first time, I wasn't Adrian's mother. I was Eleanor Hayes, a voice, a survivor, a guide. Meanwhile, Adrian's decline deepened. Isabel divorced him swiftly, taking what little remained. Friends who once flocked to his parties ignored his calls. He moved into a small unit on the outskirts of the city. Occasionally, he'd ring me, his voice subdued, asking for advice rather than money. Once he confessed, "Mom, I don't know who I am without everything you gave me." I told him gently, "That's for you to find out. I found myself in losing you. Maybe you can find yourself in losing me." It wasn't revenge in the traditional sense. There were no lawsuits, no public shouting matches. My revenge was quieter, more enduring. It was in living well, in showing him that the woman he dismissed was not destroyed but reborn. It was in watching him face consequences not from my hands, but from his own choices. And as I thrived, he was forced to confront the emptiness of the life he had built on deceit. The book eventually found a publisher. Its title was simple, Invisible No More. At the launch, held in a small bookstore on Ligon Street, I stood before strangers and friends alike, reading passages about love, sacrifice, and awakening. Adrian didn't attend, but Margaret did, and so did members of my writing circle. Their cheers reminded me that my life had blossomed far beyond the confines of motherhood. Months later, Adrian sent me a letter. Not a text, not a phone call, a letter written in his shaky handwriting. He admitted everything, the affairs, the forged signatures, the selfishness that had consumed him. He ended with words I never thought I'd hear. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope one day I can earn it." I folded the letter and placed it in my journal. Forgiveness was complicated. I wasn't ready to give it, but I also no longer carried the weight of needing to. My peace no longer depended on him. My life had. Now, when I sit by my window in Melbourne, sipping tea as the trams rattle past, I smile. I am not bitter, though scars remain. I am not broken, though cracks still show. I am whole in ways I never imagined. Adrian lives with his consequences, and I live with my freedom. That is the balance of life. And it is enough. So, if you are listening to my story, remember this: you are never too old, too worn, or too defeated to reclaim your dignity. Love fiercely, but protect your heart. Give generously, but never without boundaries. And above all, never let anyone convince you that your worth is tied to their comfort. Like this video if you felt my journey, subscribe to hear more stories of strength, and share it with someone who may need this truth. Comment below, tell me, what boundaries will you set today? Because in the end, living joyfully, freely, and authentically is the sweetest revenge of all. Moral lesson: true love requires boundaries, protects your worth, reclaim your voice, and let your healing become the most powerful justice.